Hello everyone and welcome once again to The View from the Midwest. It's time for our weekly look at the NHL Central Division, so let's get right into it. And we'll start where we should start, with the top. And the Dallas Stars are currently in first place in the NHL Central Division. They lead it by 2, but there's only 4 points separating them from the third place team in the Chicago Blackhawks. So everything is very fluid, and it seems like it's going to be changing week to week until the end of the season when things finally get wrapped up. But let's start off with this past week. The Dallas Stars went 2-1, pretty much kind of solidifying themselves as the lone team at the top of the division. They started off the week a little bit shaky. They lost to the Los Angeles Kings, but hey, lately, who hasn't really, because the Kings have been on fire. The score in that one was 5-2 on Tuesday. Then they rebounded with a 4-3 win against Tampa Bay on Thursday and kept their 2-point division lead by shutting out the Islanders 3-0 on Saturday, when the Blues also played and kept pace by winning themselves, but they couldn't make up any ground because the Islanders couldn't score any goals. The Chicago Blackhawks, moving right on, the Blackhawks kept their free fall going as they seem to have really hit the skids here. They've lost 6 of their last 8. They went 1-3 this past weekend. They ended their 4-game losing streak, though, with a 4-0 win over Winnipeg on Friday. However, that was sandwiched between some losses that made up the bread on that sandwich. They had a losing meat sandwich. They lost 5-0 to the Kings on Monday, but I kind of mentioned that seems to be what everybody's going to do here recently. They lost 3-2 to Philadelphia Wednesday, and then 3-2 to Minnesota last night as well. The Nashville Predators had a pretty good week. They went 2-1. They started off the week very well by going on the road and getting a 3-2 victory against Edmonton, and then they came home for a 4-2 victory over the Islanders. But that kind of seems to be another pattern that everybody's getting here, that they're picking up wins over the Islanders, losses to the Kings. Unfortunately for the Predators, they capped off the week with the likely President's Cup winners in the Washington Capitals and lost 4-1. So it wasn't necessarily the weekend bookend that they would have liked, but when you get 2 wins earlier in the week and then you play the team with the best record in the NHL, you can forgive that one a little bit. Colorado managed to really kind of solidify themselves as one of the teams to be reckoned with. They went 3-0 this week and really took hold. Even though it's only by 2 points, they still took hold of that final wild card spot. They went, as I mentioned, 3-0. All their games were on the road, but unlike the Blues, though they made a pretty much similar trip, kind of in reverse order, they managed to take advantage of those teams, whereas St. Louis could only take care of Vancouver. Colorado, as I mentioned, did not let that Canada trip deter them. They took care of all their games. They beat Vancouver 3-1 on Wednesday, the Flames 4-3 on Friday, and then took down Edmonton 3-2 on Sunday, capping off a very good week and leapfrogging over the Minnesota Wild, who didn't have a bad week, but they had just enough go against them to allow Colorado to get in there. Minnesota had a busy week, but they couldn't help themselves out in the standings because they only went 2-2, and that kind of 500 record really ended up kind of costing them a little bit. The week got off to a really poor start by losing 3-2 in Ottawa on Tuesday, and then getting whooped 7-4 by New Jersey in New Jersey on Thursday. But then they kind of turned the week around a little bit. They weren't about to let their playoff hopes be dashed with one poor week, so they kept themselves alive a little bit. They won 3-2 in their next 2 games. The first at home against Carolina, and then a big win over the Chicago Blackhawks last night. That was at home, but at this point in the season, Chicago's getting a little bit desperate for points, and Minnesota managed to hold them off the board and pick up those extra points to really help them out. The Minnesota Wild, as I mentioned, went 2-2. Winnipeg Jets went 1-3. They're kind of out of all the race. They can play spoilers if they play some of the division opponents, but right now they're just not looking like a team to be reckoned with in any way, shape, or form. Their lone win was back on Monday with a Canadian victory over Vancouver by the score of 5-2. Then they went on to drop games on the road to Calgary and at home to Chicago and Anaheim by scores of 4-1, 4-0, and 3-2. 2. So let's take a look at the standings and let everybody know where everybody sits. Of course, as I mentioned, the Dallas Stars are currently in first place with 95 points and a record of 43, 21, and 9. Only behind them by 2 points, though, are the St. Louis Blues. And all the top 3 teams have played the same number of games through Sunday night coming into Monday. The Blues are 42, 22, and 9, as I mentioned, with 93 points. The Blackhawks are 42, 24, and 7 for 91 points. So everybody still with that kind of option to leapfrog teams if they have a good week, maybe even just catch somebody if you have a good game and they have the night off and what have you. So it's a really fluid situation, and it's going to make for an intriguing last couple weeks of the season. The Predators still alive, really, if things keep falling their way and Chicago keeps dropping and Nashville can pick up some important points, they could sneak into that 3 spot. And wouldn't that be an interesting upset in terms of everybody had pretty much just decided that Dallas, St. Louis, and Chicago, in whatever order, were going to be the top 3. But Nashville, not quite out of it yet. But they are down by 6 points, so it's going to be a little bit difficult. They need some help. But they have 85 points. They are 36, 23, and 13. Avalanche are behind them. They currently hold the last wild card spot. They have 80 points. They have a record of 38, 31, and 4. Only behind them by 1 point, though, are the Minnesota Wild. They are 34, 28, and 11. And bringing up the rear are the Winnipeg Jets at 29, 37, and 6 with 64 points. Looking ahead to this week, the Minnesota Wild are going to take on the Avalanche in Colorado on Saturday. So that depending on what those teams do with the rest of their week, that could be an all-important game. If they're still only separated by 1 point, that could really swing things in one club's favor or the other. If Colorado manages to stay up by 1 point going into that game, maybe even build on that lead, then they could really kind of push out the Minnesota Wild with a victory there. But the Minnesota Wild could keep their hopes alive with a victory. It's going to be an incredibly exciting matchup there. The Blackhawks take on Dallas tonight, so Chicago not only looking to end their losing streak, but tie the Blues for second place and really kind of bring Dallas back to the pack a little bit by keeping them pat on where they are stuck in the points right now by 95. So that's going to be a really important game for both of those teams. Obviously, from a Blues perspective, you don't really care who wins. You almost root for Dallas a little bit simply because you think to yourself, okay, well, if Chicago wins, yes, they're going to tie us with points, but then when we catch up in terms of games played, then we can pass them back up and maybe even tie Dallas, given the results falling the correct ways. If Dallas wins, all of a sudden they're 4 points ahead, and you have to win just to keep yourself within 2. So maybe you root for Chicago a little bit. That's up to Blues fans as an individual, but it's going to be an incredibly important game. As a Blues fan, the only outcome I think you hope not to have is an overtime game, because if it goes to overtime, then everybody gets a point no matter what happens, and then that kind of throws everything out of whack. Right now, it's better for the Blues if people only get 2 points and there's not some sort of 3-point swing in terms of the points that are going to be given to other teams. Minnesota and Nashville also have the unenviable task of playing the Kings this week. I understand that that's not a division opponent, but those are 2 teams that are still fighting for playoff spots, playing against one of the hottest teams in the league. The Kings took care of 2 of the best teams in the division already last week, looking to do the same against some good opponents here this week. Thank goodness the St. Louis Blues don't have to play the LA Kings this week. That is a view from the Midwest, though. The NHL Central Division recap. Who do you think is going to finish? It's an up and down affair. It seems like everybody's riding that elevator up and down. Where do you think everybody's going to finish? Comment, rate, and subscribe. Follow me on YouTube. I've got other videos going up. It's been a little bit lax here lately due to the fact that I was covering a basketball tournament in Joplin, but that's no excuse really. But I still got it done on some of these videos, so hopefully you're enjoying these. And go ahead and leave us a comment, whether it's on the website, on YouTube, Facebook, wherever. Doesn't matter to me. And keep the conversation rolling. But until the next time, I'll see you then.